Carroll O'Connor was the face of one of television's most iconic shows, a larger-than-life presence both on and off the screen. But behind the fame and the unforgettable performances was a grudge he could never let go of. It wasn't just a disagreement or a clash of personalities. It was something deeper, something personal. For decades, fans had no idea it was even happening. He never spoke the name publicly again, and when the final curtain fell, the silence said it all. So what really happened? And who was the one person Carroll O'Connor never forgave? The answer would leave many speechless. You're a meathead, dead from the neck up. Before there was tension, before the silence, there was something else: chemistry. In the early 1970s, a bold new television show burst onto the scene and changed American culture forever. That show was All in the Family, and at its core was Carroll O'Connor playing the unforgettable Archie Bunker. Audiences instantly connected with him. He was gruff, loud, unapologetically stuck in his ways, but somehow deeply human. Opposite him was a younger, sharp-witted character who served as Archie's perfect foil. Their back-and-forth dynamic was more than just funny. It was electric. Viewers couldn't get enough of their clashes, their debates, and the unexpected moments of connection. On screen, it was magic. But what many didn't realize at the time was how closely their characters mirrored the tension building behind the scenes. In public, they appeared to get along fine. They cracked jokes at press events and praised each other in interviews. But according to several crew members, there was a subtle current of discomfort between them almost from the start. It wasn't explosive or dramatic, but it was there. Some say it started during rehearsals when creative decisions began rubbing both men the wrong way. Others believe it was personal from the beginning. Two very different people from very different worlds trying to work together under a national spotlight. One was a seasoned actor with classical training and decades of experience. The other, still early in his career, brought new energy to the show along with strong opinions and a sharp tongue. As All in the Family gained traction and became a cultural phenomenon, the differences between the two stars only grew more obvious. They had different methods, different goals, and different visions of what the show should ultimately be, and while they both managed to keep things professional for a time, that quiet tension never really went away. What began as creative friction slowly and silently turned into something much more personal. From the outside, All in the Family looked like a well-oiled machine. Week after week, it delivered laughs, headlines, and record-breaking ratings. But behind the laughter was a set full of strong opinions, high expectations, and two leading men who rarely saw eye to eye. No matter how well they played it on camera, Carroll O'Connor was known to be meticulous, almost obsessively so. He believed in character depth, careful timing, and meaningful storytelling. Every word mattered. Every pause had purpose. He didn't just memorize scripts. He studied them, reshaped them, and made them better. Writers respected him, but they also knew he wasn't afraid to push back when something didn't sit right. Then there was his younger co-star, full of energy and sharp humor, who brought a different kind of presence to the room. He was more relaxed, more reactive, and definitely more vocal about the direction he thought the show should take. While Carroll wanted to stay true to the character-driven roots of the series, his co-star was increasingly drawn to using the show as a platform to say something bigger. He had ideas, lots of them, but those ideas sometimes clashed with Carroll's vision of what the show was meant to be. In one incident recalled by a crew member, Carroll reportedly asked for a rewrite of a scene that felt too broad or too preachy, but his co-star insisted it remain exactly as written. The disagreement wasn't loud, but it was firm, and when the episode aired, some noticed the final edit leaned more toward the younger actor's tone than Carroll's. It was subtle, but to Carroll, it was a pattern. According to people on set, it started small, offhand comments during table reads, disagreements about a line or a joke, but it escalated. There were moments when Carroll felt his co-star wasn't respecting the heart of the show, or worse, twisting it into something it was never meant to be. At one point, Carroll even threatened to walk off the series due to frustration with the way episodes were being handled, though he never named names. Still, many believed they knew who he was talking about. Other cast members like Gene Stapleton and Sally Struthers were often caught in the middle, doing their best to ease the tension, but even they couldn't always soften the divide. Carroll had a deep emotional investment in every scene, and when his co-star played it too loose or improvised during live tapings, it threw off his rhythm. For someone like Carroll, who built each beat with purpose, that wasn't just distracting, it was disruptive. Yet neither man ever let the cracks show on camera. Their performances remained flawless, their timing sharp. Viewers would never have guessed that some scenes were filmed just moments after heated disagreements. But the tension was there, building with each passing season. Carroll grew more guarded, and his co-star became more outspoken. Although they never had a full-blown falling out, at least not publicly, the relationship had clearly changed. What happened next would move things beyond tension and into something much harder to fix. For years, the strain between Carroll O'Connor and his co-star simmered quietly, never boiling over but never cooling down. Then came the moment many believed changed everything. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a shouting match, just a few words spoken in public that left a deep mark. During an interview, Carroll's co-star was asked about the show's impact and the meaning behind their characters. At first, the response seemed routine, but then came a shift. He began to distance himself from the character of Archie Bunker and, by extension, from Carroll himself. He described Archie not just as flawed, but as dangerous, a relic of a mindset that, in his view, should never be admired or sympathized with. It might not have sounded like much to outsiders, but to Carroll, it was a slap in the face. Those close to him said he took it personally, very personally. To the audience, Archie was a fictional character, but to Carroll, Archie was a carefully crafted portrayal, layered, deliberate, and deeply human. He never saw the character as a hero, but he also never saw him as a villain. Archie Bunker was meant to be a mirror, not a monster. Hearing his co-star describe him in such harsh terms felt like more than criticism. It felt like betrayal. Even worse, the comments were picked up by newspapers and television outlets across the country. Headlines hinted at a brewing disagreement, and while Carroll never publicly fired back, he was quietly livid. Friends say he felt ambushed, especially since his co-star had built his career beside Carroll, playing off Archie's energy and complexity. It felt like an erasure of everything they had built together. Worse still, Carroll believed those comments blurred the line between the character and the actor. Whispers began circulating, quiet but persistent, that Carroll agreed with some of Archie's more controversial views. He denied it again and again, but the damage was done. The quiet distance between the two men turned colder, something Carroll carried with him long after the series ended. In private conversations with trusted friends, he reportedly said, "I know what Archie was about. I helped shape him, and now he acts like it was poison." That sense of betrayal, of being left to defend the character alone, stayed with him for years. Even when asked about it later, Carroll never addressed the incident directly, but his tone always shifted when the topic came close. Friends noticed the change. He stopped mentioning his co-star in interviews, and during reunions and retrospectives, he became noticeably reserved. He would praise the writers, producers, and guest actors, but not him. Not anymore. The show had made them both famous. But in Carroll's eyes, the price was a fractured relationship that would never fully heal. When the cameras stopped rolling, the silence between them only grew louder. When All in the Family finally came to an end, it marked the close of an era. Millions of viewers had followed the Bunkers for years, laughing, arguing, and growing along with them. But as the lights faded and the soundstage emptied, Carroll O'Connor and his co-star went in two very different directions, both professionally and personally. Carroll remained deeply tied to the character of Archie Bunker. Even when the show transitioned into Archie Bunker's place, he stayed committed. The world may have been changing, but he still believed in telling stories rooted in raw, uncomfortable honesty. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing impact. And though he took on other roles later in life, most notably in the Heat of the Night, the shadow of Archie never quite left him. It was a character that defined him, for better or worse. Meanwhile, his former co-star seemed to pivot almost overnight. He stepped away from acting and dove into directing and not just casual projects. He quickly became one of the most respected filmmakers of his generation. He was behind massive hits, widely acclaimed for his work behind the camera. And yet, in all the interviews, retrospectives, and documentaries celebrating his rise as a filmmaker, Carroll's name was barely ever mentioned. The man who had once stood beside him, scene after scene, was almost entirely erased from the story. Carroll noticed, and it stung. At award shows, when All in the Family was honored or referenced, Carroll would warmly mention Gene Stapleton, Norman Lear, and others who helped shape the show's legacy. But he never spoke his co-star's name, not once. It wasn't just omission. It felt intentional. When reporters asked about him, Carroll would politely steer the conversation elsewhere. He never insulted or lashed out, but the message was clear. There was no reconciliation, no shared nostalgia, no warmth. Insiders who had worked on the show began to speak more openly about the rift. Some called it pride. Others said it was a clash of values. But those closest to Carroll believed it was something deeper. A sense of being discarded, of helping someone rise only to be forgotten once they reached the top. As the years passed, the silence became the story. Two men who had shared the spotlight, who had together created one of the most impactful shows in television history, now lived like strangers. But Carroll wouldn't stay silent forever. Eventually, when the right moment came, he spoke his truth, and what he said left fans stunned. Years went by. The world moved on. Television evolved, audiences changed, and the legacy of All in the Family became part of pop culture history. Yet for Carroll O'Connor, some wounds never fully healed. He rarely spoke about the past unless someone asked directly, and even then, he chose his words carefully. But when he did reflect on those years, the absence of one name was deafening. During a televised interview in the 1990s, Carroll was asked if he missed working with his former cast. His expression shifted slightly, just enough for viewers to notice. He smiled gently and said, "Some of them, yes." When asked specifically about the on-screen son-in-law who had shared so many scenes with him, Carroll paused. "The boy did a good job," he said. That was it. No name, no warmth, just the boy. To most viewers, it might have seemed like an odd choice of words, but to those who knew Carroll, it spoke volumes. He was not a man who forgot names. He was deliberate, precise, and when he chose not to name someone, it was intentional. It was his way of saying, "I have nothing more to say." Privately, friends said Carroll still felt betrayed, not by scandal or wrongdoing, but by something far more personal. He believed his co-star had used All in the Family as a stepping stone, only to later discredit the show's heart, and by extension, its leading man. He felt erased, as though the years they'd spent building one of television's most powerful duos had been brushed aside. Even during late-night talk shows and industry events, Carroll never broke. If the name came up, he would nod politely and change the subject. He once said to a colleague off camera, "There's nothing to be said that I haven't already decided not to say." It wasn't spite. It was a boundary, one he never crossed. Several of his colleagues later confirmed what many had long suspected. Carroll never truly forgave what he saw as a rewriting of their shared history. Not only had the respect vanished, but so had the acknowledgement. It wasn't about ego, it was about legacy. Carroll had poured his soul into the show, into the character, into the message. Watching someone walk away from that while downplaying the role he played cut deeper than most fans ever realized. To him, it was never just about professional differences or creative disputes. It was about loyalty, gratitude, and the painful sense that, when everything was said and done, he had been left behind. Yet even in his final interviews, he never lashed out. He never told the full story. He let the silence speak for him, and when the end finally came, that silence became permanent. Carroll O'Connor's final years were marked by grace, resilience, and quiet reflection. He endured personal heartbreak, including the tragic loss of his son, and faced health struggles that slowly dimmed his public presence. But through it all, he remained a symbol of strength for the fans who had grown up watching him. When news broke of his passing in June 2001, tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Actors, directors, and producers lined up to share their memories. Norman Lear, Gene Stapleton, and countless others honored the man who had brought such depth and humanity to Archie Bunker. But one voice was noticeably absent. Carroll's most well-known co-star remained silent. Days passed, then weeks. No tribute, no statement, no appearance at the funeral. For fans hoping to see a final gesture of respect, the silence was impossible to ignore. Some believed the choice was personal, an act of quiet mourning. Others saw it differently, as final confirmation that the rift between the two men had never healed. Not in life, not in death, not even in legacy. The funeral itself was modest but heartfelt, attended by close family, longtime friends, and several television legends. Nearly everyone who had worked with Carroll spoke of his kindness, professionalism, and fierce loyalty. But as the service unfolded, many couldn't help but notice the empty chair where his former co-star might have sat. Some expected a surprise appearance, a last embrace of the past, but it never came. Years later, documentaries about All in the Family began to surface, looking back at the show's cultural impact, the cast chemistry, and its fearless storytelling. Carroll's name was celebrated, his influence honored, his genius remembered. Yet once again his former co-star kept his distance. While others praised Carroll's commitment and artistry, there was no extended commentary from the man who had once stood by his side in nearly every episode. When asked in later interviews about All in the Family, the co-star spoke in broad, detached terms, never mentioning Carroll by name, never offering the tribute fans had longed for. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was simply empty. That emotional distance left a lasting impression, as though those shared years had been quietly boxed away, no longer part of the story he wanted to tell. Fans noticed. Comment sections filled with questions. Why the silence? Why the coldness? And though no direct answer was ever given, many believed the truth was simple. Whatever had happened between Carroll O'Connor and his co-star had never been resolved. It wasn't a tabloid feud or a dramatic explosion. It was something deeper, a quiet, fundamental break that neither man could bring himself to mend. Some say Carroll waited for an apology that never came. Others believe he made peace with the silence. But one thing was certain. When it came time to say goodbye, there was no reunion, no heartfelt message, just the quiet echo of a friendship that had long since faded. And in a way, that silence said more than words ever could. Carroll O'Connor gave the world one of the most iconic characters in television history. Archie Bunker was more than just a role. He was a lightning rod, a mirror to the times, and a vessel through which Carroll poured truth, vulnerability, and biting wit. Millions laughed with him, argued about him, and saw themselves reflected in him, whether they wanted to or not. But Carroll was more than the man behind Archie. He was a thoughtful artist, a devoted father, and someone who valued loyalty above all else. That was what made the fracture with his co-star so painful, not just for him, but for everyone who had admired their on-screen magic. It had never been fake. Their chemistry was real, their timing impeccable. Together they brought something to life that couldn't be rehearsed, and that is what made the silence afterward so haunting. There were no headlines, no scandals, no public arguments, just absence. Two men who had once shared a stage, shared history, and shared greatness, never spoke of one another again. Not warmly, not fondly, not at all. Maybe that's what makes it all the more tragic. Because the story of All in the Family was never just about a family. It was about people trying to understand one another across a divide. And in real life, that understanding was never reached. Carroll never named him. Not in interviews, not in speeches, not even in passing. He let the silence speak for him. And perhaps in doing so, he preserved his dignity. Perhaps he knew that some stories are best left unfinished. The one person Carroll O'Connor never forgave was someone he once shared the spotlight with, someone who helped shape one of the most unforgettable shows ever made. And yet, when the lights dimmed, there was no handshake, no closure, no final word, just distance, just quiet. Sometimes the greatest stories aren't the ones told in full, but the ones we're left to wonder about.